When the sheriff clicked the cuffs at my dining table, I emptied the last bottle into the sink and raised a water glass to the photographs over the mantle. Nobody noticed my hands stop shaking. They were staring at the lab folder that explained why I had been forgetting names, stumbling on the porch steps, and begging for a nightcap. My family had been drugging my whiskey. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 69 years old, a grandfather, a retired lineman who still keeps a coil of climbing rope by the garage door out of habit. My wife, Mary, passed 3 winters ago after 4 decades of tending her garden and tolerating my knack for saving bent nails, for later. The house we bought in 1988 sits on a corner lot on Walnut and Brandon, where the sidewalk roots push up from the maple out front. I can walk to both my son's places and to my daughter's townhouse. Most Thursday nights, we all gathered here. There was laughter and casserole, and I toasted the people who carried Mary's laugh in their faces. I liked that pattern. A man can grow to need a thing like that. It was spring when I first noticed the change, on a night that smelled like wet mulch after the rain. We had meatloaf because Ruth swore it was the only thing the little ones would swallow without drama. The grandkids camped by the television. Mark and his wife Kelsey loaded the dishwasher in that quick, quiet way of married people who have been through 100 blended dinners, and David took out the trash. Nothing special. I poured 1 glass from a bottle I had been saving, a single barrel I bought as a foolish treat on the day I retired. I took 1 small sip in the den where I keep my newspapers, then put the glass down because it did not taste like it used to, candied orange, old oak, and the place where my father's hand held mine for the first time near a fireplace. Instead, there was a chalky back of the tongue flatness that reminded me of a hospital corridor. I thought it was my grief confusing taste with sorrow. I thought I was the broken thing in the room, and the whiskey was the mirror. That night, I woke at 2 a.m. with tingling hands and a head like a wool sack. My mouth was dry. I stood at the sink over the bottle and took another sip and another after that. By morning the shake steadied into a hum. It would have embarrassed Mary to see me that way, leafing through old clippings about bridge repairs just to trick my mind into focusing. It was easier to blame everything on her absence than to examine the mechanics of it. Why did the tremor crest on Fridays and Saturdays, and why did a glass make it recede? The story is as old as men. A widower gets a habit and makes a fool of himself. I have heard it told at American Legion halls as comedy, a man singing to his belt buckle about the bottle and the hole in his chest. I did not think I was the punchline. I mowed the grass, repaired the squeak in the attic fan, paid the property tax online, and replaced 2 fence pickets the dog from next door had chewed through. And I looked forward to the Thursdays when the noise of the family filled the kitchen from floor tile to ceiling. The second sign was smaller. I keep a box of wooden toothpicks in the pantry on the left side of the 3rd shelf. Thursday afternoon, I reached for it and saw Kelsey's hand, just then, sliding a bottle back into place in the row of whiskey on the same shelf. She smiled. "Just dusting, Dad," she said, and kissed the air near my cheek. "Your labels collect flour like they bake at night in here." She had a way of moving that looked like she owned the rhythm of every room. Kelsey is the one who, years back, taught me how to use the set time on the coffee maker. I would have given her the keys to the place without a second thought. That afternoon, the foil on the bottleneck flashed under the weak pantry bulb, and there was a new line on it, a little ridge like a fingernail path. I pressed it with my thumb and it gave. Another week. The pain behind my eyes started before dinner, like a warning. I took a nap before Ruth's lasagna, woke groggy, and poured a glass from a fresh bottle I had bought at Olson's on Tuesday. The cat cracked the way factory seals do. The first sip had that same dusted floor feeling. Halfway through the glass, I felt normal again. Normal. It is a greedy word. It made me thirsty in a new way. That night, I almost fell when the dog, Mickey, darted in front of me at the top of the stairs. I had to sit on the step until the room slowed its circling. My doctor, a good man named Patel who wears bright socks, listened to everything I said and none of what I had not yet thought to say. He told me to feed myself properly and keep a journal. He did not ask about Thursday nights or why my calendar had little clouds sketched on some squares. I wrote better on Friday mornings and fog on Saturdays. I wrote dreams on the nights when Mary came and sat with me, when I could almost smell her shampoo that we bought for years at the little place next to the old bank. In the morning, I would reach for the bottle as if waking up meant submission, not choice. There are things I am good at, and the first is noticing. In 1975, in college, I failed 2 classes because the power of noticing other people turned out to be the only thing I was actually any good at besides climbing a utility pole. That is how you keep alive on a line, you look for patterns. The creak before the snap. The sag before the spin. So I kept the symmetry of the weeks in my mind and sat quiet inside it. 3 dinners later, I saw it. There was a white line on the inside curve of one bottle's neck, faint as a paper cut. The light from the pantry bulb picked it from the glass. I put it back and turned it twice, pretending the caps and labels were baseball cards I was admiring. When I stepped out of the pantry, Kelsey was by the sink with a dish rag and a jar of cumin that she had no reason to hold. She had opened the pantry door earlier to find the cinnamon. On the counter, her phone lay face up with a message bubble half swollen, the words, "Tonight" handle, visible for a breath before the screen went dark. I did not want that thought. It arrived anyway. I walked outside with Mickey and leaned against the mailbox as if my back were the part of me that needed support. That night, I called a man I had not spoken to in 20 years. Lionel Chen and I met in a physics lab where I was the only fool who liked teaching underclassmen how to solder, and he could explain anything, using only a student coffee cup and 2 paper clips. He went on to run an analytical lab, the kind of place where a smear on a glass slide becomes a story. I had sent him a Christmas card forever ago. He called me Gus, as he always had, even though Mary hated that nickname. "You do not call a laboratory because you are sentimental," he said without hello. "Tell me." I told him the small pieces, the edges without the center. He did not laugh. He asked about the bottles, the cabinet, how many family members came and went. He asked if anyone had ever prepared a drink out of my sight. I smiled at the ceiling because I had taught him to ask those questions with patience. He said the word chain of custody 3 times in 10 minutes. "Gus, do not drink anything you do not open in front of me. Can you bring me 5 bottles? 2 brand new from the store. 3 from your shelf. Do not tell a soul. Pack them so the labels do not touch anything. Bring them tomorrow." The next morning, I bought 2 bottles from Olson's in my neighborhood, let the cashier ring them while I stared at the security mirror and imagined who I had become in that fisheye glass. At home, I took 3 from my shelf. The room felt like a church. I boxed them up like they were fragile parts for a broken machine and drove to the community college where Lionel teaches part-time now, because retirement bored him. He took the box and did not open it until he had a camera recording and a yellow form with numbered lines on a clipboard. He wore gloves and set each bottle on a black mat like it was evidence. He numbered them with a pen and looked at me as if I had never left the lab after all. "Give me a week," he said. "And Gus, if you feel the itch tonight, call me instead of drinking." No heroics. He called me on Wednesday, early, a quiet voice that made the room too small all at once. Gus, you need to listen. We ran GCMS and LCMS on all 5. The 2 you bought at Olson's are clean. The 3 from your shelf are not. There is phenibut. There is a benzodiazepine analog that should not be in any consumer product. There are alkaloids likely from kratom, but cut with a synthetic I am not naming over the phone. This combination creates craving and fog. It slows the mind, makes you stumble, and then makes you think the liquid is the cure. It is dangerous. It can hurt your memory. It can kill you if you stop without care. Gus, I need you to talk to the police. It is a funny thing, how you start at the thing you love most to calm yourself when you hear the worst. I turned to Mary's photo on the bookcase. The one on our porch steps with her hand on my shoulder, the hand that had sent me to change the oil in Mark's car on a summer night when that boy should have known how. I told that photograph, you were right to ask me to outlive you. I thanked Lionel and drove to the county sheriff's office. The man at the window looked the kind of skeptical you have to be to do his job. What makes you think your family would do such a thing? He asked, and he softened it with a slower tone. I offered the lab report, the chain of custody notes, and the dates on the bottles that matched the dates on my calendar where I had sketched little clouds. He took them to a detective named Alvarez who came back with a manna-from-heaven look on his face that is rare in men who are paid to be stoned. Alvarez asked to see the pantry. He asked about the Thursday dinners. He asked if anyone had the nerve to propose memory care lately. I laughed without meaning to, and he did not chastise me for it. We can do this 2 ways, Alvarez said in my kitchen that afternoon. Quietly, with warrants served later. Or we can watch it happen and catch hands on the jar. That is riskier for you. But stronger in court. You decide. I will not drink a drop, I said. You bring whatever you need and you sit where you like. It is my house. I want them to know I watched them as they watched me. We set a plan. Alvarez installed 2 small cameras in my pantry, one above the door frame, one disguised as a magnet on the bottom shelf where Mary used to keep flour. There is a humorless poetry in hiding a camera inside her favorite obsolete kitchen timer. He dusted 3 bottles with a marker that would tag the skin of anyone who handled the caps. He touched the shrink band on one bottle with an almost invisible thread of tamper film. He placed a fresh, factory-sealed bottle on the shelf and weighed it on a little black scale, writing the figure in his notebook. He told me not to say the name of the chemical unless asked. He told me to keep cool. That Thursday, I set the table with the same white dishes we bought when Ruth was born, the ones with the little blue line around the rim. I put Mary's chair at the head of the table, as I had since she died, and I put a lady's shawl over the back because I had never found the courage to fold it away. The house filled in its usual order. David came first with his girls in baseball uniforms and a jar of something green his wife had left in the car, back at their place. Ruth arrived with store-bought rolls on a plate she pretended were warm. Mark and Kelsey walked in last, the way people do when they want the last word before anyone else has said a thing. I could tell you we were a family with normal ugliness. That is true. I could tell you what I had done for them, and it would also be true. But I want to show you, because if you have ever given your children the best years of your back in your sleep, you understand the arithmetic that follows. In 2009, David asked for $8,000 to cover a bridge between one job and the next. In 2012, Mark wanted $40,000 to buy his way into a business with a friend who moved to Scottsdale 2 months later. In 2017, Ruth needed $3,200 for braces for her oldest, and I said yes, and bought myself cheap coffee for a year while she bought herself a new phone. The numbers are not the insult. It is the way they graced me with the story that I was both essential and in the way. Last summer, Kelsey sat me down with brochures for facilities with names like Maple Glen and Comfort Pines. She said, "Memory care," as if she had practiced it. Mark said, "You will be surrounded by people your age," as if my healthiest habit was proximity to decay. Ruth said, "You will not have to worry," and that is the closest she has ever come to cruelty. I tore the brochures in half after they left and taped them back together and put them in a file labeled "Not Dead Yet." I am not theatrical. The label was for me. When they sat that Thursday, I noticed all the little choices that had been invisible to me. Kelsey chose the seat that gave her line of sight to the kitchen and the pantry. Mark fetched the ice. Ruth did not take off her coat, a tell that meant she wanted to leave fast, or wanted the exit visible. David winked at me like Ally Theater. The grandkids spilled ranch dressing in the way that children do, indifferent to adult wars. We were perfect. We ate meatloaf again. I stood to pour a toast to Mary, and the room went respectfully quiet. I topped up my glass from a bottle on the table as if I had not rehearsed this second all afternoon with the certainty of a field tech pre-flight. The glass clinked the way glasses do when a house has survived storms. I did not drink. I set the glass down, misdirecting my own hand, and asked if anyone wanted more rolls. Kelsey rose with my plate to warm it up. She is the fastest dishwasher I have ever seen. She knows where everything belongs. She returned my plate and then said, in that helpful tone I had once mistook for love, "Dad, your pantry needs a dust. I will wipe down those shelves. Sit." You never sit. I stood and wobbled a little to make her proud. "Thank you," I said. The top shelf collects spice when I cook. I sat and listened to a sound I had decided years ago was the sound of kindness, someone in your pantry making your life better. What I heard that night was the sound of a cap turning. There is a very particular squeak in a shrink band when it is twisted by a hand that knows its catch points. There was a rustle of something plastic. There was a hush. Kelsey returned with a smile that I used to think had saved my son. The magnet under the shelf recorded her fingers on the bottle head. The camera above the door recorded the pale powder leaving a tiny amber vitamin jar that I have since learned they sold in bundles on the internet with names like Focus and Calm and Crave. The black light later told us the rest. But the human I knew enough as soon as she moved from that threshold. I did not say a word. I asked my granddaughter about school. I pretended to misplace the salt. I refilled water glasses. Alvarez had told me to let it play, to let it breathe, because some criminals need to walk their own rope until they tangle themselves in it. That is hard to do when the criminals are your children. Kelsey leaned over the whiskied air of the table. "You should try that nice bottle," she said, naming it, and this is how stupid I once was. I built a memory of her tastes out of a decade of holidays and let it reassure me she could not be a monster. I tipped the glass toward the light. The film on the surface was so delicate I would have missed it if I had not been a man who fixed motors by listening. I put it to my lips without drinking because Alvarez had told me to be honest in the theater of the moment. It smelled like someone had swallowed a hardware store. My stomach tightened. Alvarez stood from the living room and said the name on his badge in a voice that pushed the air sideways. Another deputy came from the hallway. A third from the back porch where he had been waiting in the dark like a brave man. They moved with the choreography of no surprises. Alvarez asked Kelsey to hold out her hands. The black light hummed and made the film on her skin fluoresce. It made a ring on her finger glow where the shrink band had kissed it. He asked Mark to unlock his phone. He used a paper signed a few hours earlier by a judge who shall never have to buy his own coffee when I am nearby again. Kelsey Whitaker, Alvarez said, and then he changed to her maiden name because justice is tidy. You are under arrest for poisoning, conspiracy to commit elder abuse, and reckless endangerment. He did not yell. He did not need to. The handcuffs sound a special sound when they wrap a wrist. She opened her mouth to talk and closed it again when Ruth made a small noise, the kind of noise a person makes when a past story collapses into an uglier one. Mark stood with his hands stiff at his sides. He stared at the cuticle of his thumb and then he stared at me, and in his eyes I saw a machine he built in his mind, a machine that made him feel strong by making me weak. He finally got a sentence out. Dad, listen, he said, as if the world depended on the space in his mouth. Alvarez told him not to talk. Mark talked. It is not like that, he said. It was just to help you sleep. We were worried. He said we were worried as if worrying were a sacrament and the rest just the wafer you had to swallow to be a good child. Ruth is the best liar among my children because she does it so rarely. She stepped between me and the mess and held up her hands. Dad, I did not know about the powder. I only told them you could not live alone. She reached for my shoulder. Alvarez's deputy pulled her hand gently away. He called her Ms. Tilden, her married name, and asked if her husband had the draft power of attorney he had emailed to her earlier that day to look over for Dad. He showed her her own reply, in which she had given Trevor the go-ahead to notarize as soon as the behavior escalates. He asked if she wanted a lawyer. She said yes because her mouth knows to save the part of her that is expensive. David sat like a man on a train that had sped past his stop. I did not know, he said. I believed him because his voice broke in that place where a child's voice used to catch when he scraped a knee. He took his girls into the other room and turned up the television and put his hand on their shoulders the way a gentleman does when he is building a wall with his body. They took Kelsey first. They took Ruth next on the charge of conspiracy. They took Mark after they read to him a text in which he had suggested tapering Dad's blend more aggressively after the holidays so that a physician would notice cognitive decline. Later, Alvarez showed me the group chat thread named Settled Dad, where Kelsey used words like titration and habit and nightcap with a confidence I had once admired. There was a spreadsheet where they tracked the dates of Thursday dinners against my headaches and falls. There was a weekend in March where the notes read push harder. There was a line from Mark that said check Maple Glen availability before June. I did not say a word through the arrest. When the front door shut behind the last deputy, I went to the sink and poured the bottle, then the next, and the next. The sound of amber liquid finding the stainless basin will stay with me, a little funeral for the part of me that let grief dress up as thirst. I raised my glass of water to Mary's photo and whispered what she had once made me promise when she laid her hand on my chest in a hospital room that smelled like winter and bleach. Outlive them, she had said, as if time were something I could conjure. Outlive them on purpose. I promised her again in my kitchen that night, and this time the promise was not a bow to fate but a plan. The next weeks were like wind in the rafters after a storm, loud at first, then suddenly quiet. Alvarez and a prosecutor named Hanley came by to talk me through the next steps. He said words like statement, victim advocate, and restricted contact. He told me that the lab results would carry weight, that the chain of custody would make defense attorneys punchy and breathless. He asked me to write a timeline. I gave him a ledger, dates and receipts stapled in order like a book that hurts to turn. He read it in my living room and looked a little like the boy he must have been the first time he won a prize for telling the truth. I did something else, too, while the case moved through its stages with the patience of a courthouse clock. I pulled a folder from the locked drawer of my desk. It was the one Mary and I had labeled house, with a second label underneath in her neat script reading "We built this." Inside, there was the deed, the insurance, the photograph of me on the roof with Mark, 11 years old, handing me shingles. There was the list of repairs from 37 years. There was the page where Mary had written in green marker, "If they are cruel, choose strangers who are kind." I called a lawyer I knew from the time a car knocked down my fence and tried to not pay for it, and I said her name like it was a tool I was finally ready to take out of the drawer. "Rio," I said. "It is Whitaker." She knew who I was because I was the man who had sent her a Christmas card too, and she had liked Mary. I sat in the crisp quiet of her conference room with one of those glass tables that makes you see your shoes. "I need a trust," I said. "I want to live here until I die. Then I want the house and the garden sold and the money to go to scholarships for kids who fix things with their hands. I want no one who ever decided to drug their father to have access. I want something for the grandchildren that their parents cannot touch, because a child should not be crushed under their father's punishment." Rio smiled tiny, which is better than big in a lawyer. "We call that a spendthrift trust for the grandchildren," she said. "And a charitable remainder trust for the house." She asked questions I had not expected. Would I consider placing my monthly accounts under a manager, to keep me from predatory mischief? I said yes with a relief I did not know I had in me. Would I be comfortable allowing a social worker access to my home for 3 months to testify to the court that I am safe and uncoerced? I laughed because that is an easy yes compared to the one I had already made. 2 days later, I signed a revocable living trust with my dining room pen, and the house went into a charity with my and Mary's names on it that will send tools and books to the kids who sign up for the vocational program at East Tech. David cried when I told him. Not because he was in or out, but because he understood. He took a copy of the terms home to show his girls that it is still possible to turn pain into something that resembles a ladder you can climb. I did not announce changes to anyone else. Rumor and text message did their work for me. Ruth wrote me an email through her lawyer in which she called me cruel and unwell. The unwell part stung less than it might have months earlier. Unwell is something you step out of. Cruel is a choice. Mark did not write me at all. His absence was a letter I read each morning with breakfast, made of silence and distance and what he imagined was power. Physically, getting clean was uglier than the part of me that likes tidy arcs would like to admit. Dr. Patel knew the lab results and did not wear his bright socks that day. He gave me a taper plan with the seriousness of a man who knows that stopping is its own storm. Lionel called every evening for 2 weeks, a bell that signaled meaning like we were back in the lab. The first days were a long hallway of metallic taste and dreams that made me wake with my hands closed into fists like a boy ready to fight a bully, then embarrassed to discover his own bed the only thing in reach. On day 9, I stood in the garden and found myself holding a trowel without knowing how I had gotten there, and the dirt under my fingernails felt like a sermon. On day 13, I looked at a bottle at Olson's and felt nothing that resembled hunger. That was the day I bought a bag of coffee so heavy it made me laugh. On day 16, I attended Kelsey's arraignment by accident. Honestly, I had shown up for my victim advocate meeting early and had not looked at the docket. She was smaller in a cheap blue suit than she had ever been in my kitchen. She did not look at me. When the charge of poisoning was read, I felt something I have been ashamed to name only because pride is a poor companion. I felt alive. Not gloating. Not triumphant. Alive, as if the air in my chest had changed. If you have not come close to being erased by your own children, you may think this is theatrics. It is not. It is the engine turning over after you are certain it is seized. The community did what communities do. Half came with casseroles, the other half with questions they pretended were not gossip. The woman at the hardware store put 2 extra screws in my bag and told me her brother had taken good men apart the same way, with crushed pills and a hand on the back. A neighbor whose name I had never known brought me lemons from her backyard and said only, "We see you," as if the watching of a man in recovery could be kind and not bone-deep cruel. I have been accused of running my life like a small company since Mary died, and maybe that is true. I repaired the fence again. I replaced the mailbox flag that had been loose for 6 years. I installed a second lock and gave the key to David and to my friend Ed at the Legion. I closed the credit card Mark had used for gas for a year with a temporary agreement we had quietly pretended was still temporary. I changed the passwords to accounts the children did not know I knew they had guessed. I picked up my grandchildren from school one afternoon when David's car would not start and we ate sandwiches on the steps at the park, and I did not, for the length of an unhurried lunch, let the sins of their parents drown their laughter. When the preliminary hearing finally came, Alvarez walked with me up the concrete steps, as if I needed him to remind the son where to stand. The prosecutor laid out the lab results, the video from my pantry, the text messages. Kelsey's defense tried to call it a misguided attempt to manage an elderly man's anxiety. The judge asked her lawyer if he had a grandmother. He did not wait for the answer. Ruth's lawyer argued that her name in the thread was only peripheral, that she had been the voice of reason. Hanley read the line where Ruth had said, "Do it Thursday, Monday is too obvious after Sunday's incident," and the courtroom did a small, involuntary intake of breath that a room takes when a myth breaks. Mark's counsel nodded in a slow cadence I recognized as counsel for the guilty. They were bound over for trial. There will be sentencing later, and there will be letters from people who once ate my meatloaf telling the court that my children could not possibly have done a thing they saw on video doing. There will be pleas and there will be fewer dinners in my house. There will be a thrift of gentleness in my living room for a while. I can bear it. I have known worse winters. That evening, Lionel and I sat on my porch like undergraduates who had stolen time. He had brought over a cherry pie he had not baked. He lifted his glass of iced tea and asked me what I would do with the rest of my life. That is a rich question for a 69-year-old who wears the same flannel in 3 colors and cannot keep a caladium alive past September. I told him about the scholarship fund and the kids who will go get their certification and feed their families with union jobs. I told him about the woodworking class at the community center I had signed up to teach on Saturday mornings. I told him I was going to fix the step on the back porch that Mary had complained about since 2006. And the whiskey, he said, because we say things straight to each other even when they would sound rude from any other mouth. I took a breath and felt the air sit still inside me instead of scrabbling for a way out. I am done, I said. I do not know how to say it else. I am done. I slept in my own bed that night like it was a new invention. I dreamt ordinary dreams. In the morning, I walked Mickey down Walnut Street past the house where an old man paints birds with an unsteady hand and a patient heart. I thought about Mary at the kitchen table with her seed packets, telling me the Latin names for things that would sprout with or without her care, because the world is stubborn that way. I thought about the promise I had made her, a long life, not just in years but in softness of work and firmness of spine. Next Thursday, I will set the table anyway. David and his girls will come, and we will eat tacos because the youngest does not believe in meatloaf. I will pour water into the whiskey glasses and we will clink them because ritual is a tool like any other. When the meal is over, I will walk into the pantry and run my hand along the shelf where the bottles used to sit, and I will feel nothing and everything. I will carry the trash out. I will stand on the porch steps and watch the light in my house turn off room by room. I will think of the sound of handcuffs in a kitchen where a woman once powdered my whiskey, and the way my hand stopped shaking the moment her plot became something bright and ugly and survivable in the open air. And I will say to Mary, as the night collects itself across the lawn that knew every step we ever took, that I did what she told me. I did everything I could to outlive everyone who tried to write my ending. I will live, out loud and on purpose, until the maple out front loosens the sidewalk into something I cannot fix, and the kids from East Tech come with their new tools and tell me to move my feet while they make my porch a safer place. I will outlive them, which is not to say I wish them ill, though part of me is not strong enough to pretend otherwise. It means only that I am still here, that my heart still does its work with an old, stubborn engine, and that the next time I raise a glass it will be to water, to a photograph, and to a life that no one else will powder into something smaller than it is.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to the story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.